Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Friday weekly Lunch and Learn. Every Friday at noon, Sierra Club Iowa chapter goes live to give you an important environmental update. And we are nearing the end of the 2026 legislative session. There's still a few things left to do. One of those is, sometimes not what you're paying attention to because budgets and numbers and money is difficult to understand the way they move everything around. But we thought it'd be a good idea to, just kind of give people the basics of the budget, because that's what we're going to hear a lot about in these final weeks of the legislative session. So I'm going to hand it over to Pam, and she's going to explain some of the appropriations, budget, numbers things. So thank you, Pam.
Well, don't be afraid. We're not going to get into a lot of numbers or a lot of math. So this is going to be very high level. As I just said, we are winding down the legislative session. We don't know when the session will end. It is scheduled to end April 21st. That's when the per diem expense money runs out. Usually that's a signal to finish work, but sometimes it takes a few extra days beyond that. Now, there's some things that still need to be done. There are a few confirmations for people that are being appointed to boards and commissions, such as the Regents, the Parole Board, the Judicial Nominating Commission, and there's some other confirmations that need to be done. There is a series of appropriations bills, which we'll discuss in later slides, but that is money being allocated to the government agencies. It's how much money gets allocated to each individual entity. There's a bill called the Standings Bill, and that includes some miscellaneous appropriations. And there's some last policy bills that get dealt with at the very end of the session. So the session will end after the appropriation bills pass. Now let's talk about the appropriations process. The process started with the governor's budget. Each chamber then holds subcommittee meetings, committee meetings, and brings their bills to the floor, just like the policy bills. Now, the Senate worked with the governor's budget numbers. The House is on a parallel path, but they have their own set of numbers. Now, there are differences that come up between the two chambers, and they get worked out, and a final bill is then sent to the floor of both chambers for a final vote. After that, the governor is given the bill to vote, to either veto or to approve. Now, there's some interesting things with budget bills or appropriations bills, and that is the governor can line item veto individual expenditures. And that is the only situation where the governor has line item veto. Policy bills, either the whole bill gets vetoed or approved. But in appropriation bills, individual line items can be vetoed out. So on the next slide, we'll talk about some of the budget bills. Now, just like policy bills, the numbers, the bill numbers will change. They move through the processes and they'll get different numbers. And so this table shows the bill numbers as they stand today. But next week, they can be different. Now, there are several budget areas and several bills that are part of the appropriations package. One of them is the administration and regulatory appropriations. This also includes the Utilities Commission. Another one is agriculture and natural resources. This is where the REAP funding happens. REAP funding is one of our main funding mechanisms for parks and recreation at both the city, the county, and the state level. Another budget area is economic development and regions. Sometimes there's some special projects that the Economic Development Department sends to the Regents universities to work on. This year, there's some things with load forecasting, which happens to deal with transmission lines and making sure that there's adequate transmission in the state. Another budget area is education. That includes the Regents universities. There is a budget for veterans and health and human services. There are budgets for justice systems and the judicial branch. The next one that is important to us is rebuild Iowa infrastructure. Sometimes there's some special projects in that bill that are helpful to us. Another one is transportation. Federal block grants sometimes get looked at, but not every other year. That's not every year. It's usually every other year. And there's a target budget. This year, the target budget for the Senate is $9.623 billion. The governor asked for 9.66 billion. And I don't know what the number that the House is working on is, but I suspect it is larger than either the Senate or the governor's budget. And when they negotiate back and forth, eventually they'll end up with one number, and the House will have some things that they'll win, and the Senate has some things that they'll win, and finally they get a budget number. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the Taxpayer Relief Fund, because over the next few days, you may be hearing a lot about that. By law, the governor and the legislature can only spend 99% of the general funds that are collected. The state cannot go into debt to pay its bills, and Iowa must have a balanced budget. Now, when the receipts coming into the state government fall short, there are some rainy day funds to fill in the gap. And think of the rainy day funds as a savings account. Now, there are 3 reserve accounts that are maintained by the state. The first is a cash reserve fund, and it's used to support cash flow needs that occur day in and day out. And so when you need money to pay the bills and you're maybe a little off timing wise, that cash reserve fund can be used. The second is the Iowa Economic Emergency Fund. And this is to be used for emergencies and can be used for dealing with falling revenues. And the third is the Taxpayer Relief Fund. For a number of years, the Iowa legislature and the governor were setting budgets that used less than 99% of the collected general fund revenues. And the difference between the two was being put into a taxpayer relief fund. Eventually, that taxpayer relief fund grew to billions of dollars, several billions of dollars. Now, you may say, well, why was this third reserve why was this third reserve gaining this money and not being used? Well, the plan was for the funds to backfill shortages as the state moved to a flat tax and lower tax rates. And so the legislators and the governor knew that there would be some gaps, and those gaps were going to be filled with the money in the taxpayer relief fund. Now, currently revenues are falling below appropriated expenses. And in fiscal year 2026, the state used the taxpayer relief fund to balance the budget over $1 billion. That's a B with a billion. And the state will tap into the taxpayer relief fund to support the fiscal year 2027 budget. That's about $1.2 billion. Now, 2027 budget year begins on July 1. Eventually, the taxpayer relief fund will be drained, and the revenues won't match expenses, and Iowa will reach a fiscal cliff. This could happen in perhaps a couple of years. Iowans are currently seeing needed services going underfunded or not funded at all. Things could get worse. They could get much worse. And at that point, the budget will be cut along with the services the budget provides and the staff doing the work. We've often heard of this called drowning government in a bathtub. And if things don't turn around quickly, we could be doing that drowning in a couple of years. Or some tax revenue will have to be increased. And so perhaps the sales tax. Perhaps they'll have to go back in and increase the income tax. But at some point, we're going to hit a fiscal cliff. Now, let's talk about the key appropriations areas that are useful for the work that Sierra Club does. There are 4 main budgets that I watch, agriculture and natural resources And again, that funds the Department of Natural Resources and REAP, Rebuild Iowa Infrastructure Fund, Economic Development and Regions, and Education. And I have been asking the legislature this year to fund the continuous water sensor network and put that funding into one of these budgets. Now, these water sensors are in 60 water bodies. They track nutrients and some other things in the water. And that network will go silent on July 1st if there isn't additional funding. So we're asking that the legislature restore funding for the sensor network, placing the money into IIHR, Hydroscience and Engineering at the University of Iowa. We're asking for a $600,000 ongoing appropriation and a one-time appropriation of $500,000 to repair and upgrade the sensor network. There's still time to get this added to the budget, and we're asking that you contact your legislators today to ask them to support the water sensor network. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Pam. We have one question of, could you give a quick update on the status of REAP?
So REAP is authorized to be funded at $20 million. The requests right now are for $12 million. That is pretty much what has been spent the last few years. We don't see that expanding, unfortunately. The other thing that we would like to have done is expanding REAP beyond 2028. And we've asked for that. I don't know if that's going to happen this year or not, but every couple of years we have to go in and ask for REAP to be extended another year or two.
Awesome. And what is REAP for those that aren't familiar with that program?
So REAP stands for Resource Enhancement and Protection Act. That is a mechanism for funding the Department of Natural Resources. There's some money for IDLES, Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, for water quality initiatives. There's money going to the State Historical Society for cultural preservation and activities. There's some granting that comes out of that. Every county in Iowa has gotten grants from REAP to pay for projects. Many cities across the state have gotten money, and it's what pays for our parks, our state parks and recreation areas. It's a very, very important funding mechanism.
Thank you very much, Pam. Well, if anyone comes up with questions later on in the day, please put that in the comment section and we'll get to those questions. But in the meantime, please reach out to your legislators, let them know that there's still time to fund the water sensor program, and that's something that they should be doing in these final weeks of the session. So thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will see you next Friday at noon. Thank you. Bye.